They say Justice don't ride this far west anymore. Out in Gray Hollow, Justice packed its bags the day the mines dried up and the railroad skipped over the ridge. All that was left was wind, rust, and folks too stubborn to leave or too broken to start over. Clara Boone lived on the edge of that dying place, a mile beyond the church bell's reach, where the dust swallowed the trail by sundown. Her house was small, timber-framed with a roof that bowed in the middle like an old man's back. A faded blue shawl hung in the window to mark her mourning. It had been there 12 years since her husband, Caleb, was buried after the dynamite blast that tore through the South Tunnel. She didn't take it down when folks said to. "The day I stop missing him is the day I don't need the shawl," she'd say, folding laundry with the grit of someone who'd had to grow strong by hand. Eli was the only light left. 12 years old and too quick with questions. He had his father's eyes and Clara's fire. He carved wooden animals in the evenings, trading them in town for ink and paper, determined to learn his letters no matter what the school board said about no proper teacher out this way. That's what they took from her. Not just a boy. Her reason. It happened on the tail end of dusk, when the sky was still holding onto its last pale gold. Clara was in the shed, sharpening the sickle for morning harvest. The mule brayed once, long and strange. She looked up. The corral gate swung open. She ran. Hoof prints slashed the ground in loops and chaos. Blood stained the dirt near the trough. Only a few drops, but they told her everything. She called for Eli, voice breaking. No answer. Then she saw it. A silver chain, tangled in a thorn bush by the fence. Eli's locket. She dropped to her knees, pressed it to her lips. Caleb's photo on one side, hers on the other. Eli never took it off. Not to bathe, not to sleep. The next day, she rode to town. Sheriff Montlow didn't look up when she entered. Just ran a cloth over his whiskey glass, slow and apologetic. "They were Roach boys," he said finally, "from up near Devil's Spine. Ain't seen 'em in weeks, but this fits their rot." "Then saddle a posse," Clara said, steel in her voice. Montlow shook his head. "Not for one boy, Clara. You know how far that range stretches. How many caves and cuts they know better than we ever will." "Then give me your badge," she spat, "if it's worth less than a child." He turned away. Didn't even offer a prayer. Back at the house, Clara folded Eli's shirts. Smooth his bed. Laid his shoes side by side on the church altar that Sunday. Though she hadn't set foot inside in years. She didn't cry. Not where anyone could see. For 3 weeks, the world stayed silent. She took to sitting on the porch at dawn, her rifle across her knees, staring at the trail like she could will it to bring him back. Wind carried the smell of dry cedar and smoke. Vultures circled the canyon. Then one morning, just as the sun spilled over the rim of the hills, a figure appeared. Horse first. Big, black, dust-crusted. Then the man. He rode like a man whose bones didn't fit right. Slumped forward, hat pulled low. The animal walked itself, careful and slow, like it knew its rider wouldn't last long. Clara stood. Her hand went to the rifle. The man stopped at the gate. He dismounted with a groan, boots hitting dirt like stones dropped in water. Blood soaked the side of his coat, a deep, seeping red. His shirt clung to his skin. He didn't look up until he was halfway to her porch. Then he reached into his pocket and tossed something into the dust between them. The locket. Her breath caught. "He said you'd be waiting," the stranger said. His voice was dry smoke, thin and rasping. Clara stepped forward, picked up the locket. It was warm. Her fingers trembled. She looked at the man. His eyes were sunken, pale gray like river stones. There was a scar over his brow, fresh and jagged. "Where is he?" she asked. The man staggered once, then sat hard on the steps. He looked out at the horizon. "He's alive," he said. "Always." Then he fell sideways and didn't move. Clara stood over him as the wind picked up, stirring dust around her feet. Her hands tightened around the locket until her knuckles whitened. The boy was out there, somewhere in the canyons. And this man, whoever he was, had walked through hell to get to her. She bent down, brushed the blood from his collar, and whispered, "Then you're not dying yet." The sun climbed higher behind her. The trail was quiet, but justice, real, righteous justice, had just taken its first breath in years. The stranger woke 3 days later with a rifle pointed at his chest and the smell of boiled yarrow in his nose. He blinked at the low ceiling, at the flicker of lamplight, and then at Clara Boone, who sat stiffly in the rocking chair beside the bed, fingers wrapped tight around the weapon like it was part of her body. "You speak, or I'll assume you've come to finish what they started," she said. The man's lips cracked as he tried to smile. "If I wanted you dead, ma'am, I'd have died trying 3 nights back." "Plenty have." She didn't lower the rifle. "Now start with your name." He coughed, tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "Jonas," he rasped. "Just Jonas. Don't ask for the rest. I threw it away a long time ago." "Fine. Jonas." She rose slowly and placed the rifle aside, but not out of reach. "Why'd they let you walk out with my boy's locket? Or did you take it off his body?" Jonas looked at her then, not like a man with answers, but like one who carried a burden too heavy for words. "He's not dead. Not the last I saw. He gave me that locket. Told me, if I made it back, to give it to you. Proof he's alive." Clara's jaw tensed. "Then start talking. And don't stop until you've earned my trust or my bullet." Jonas swallowed. "I was with them. The Roach boys. Not by choice. I owed men worse than them, and hiding in Devil's Spine was safer than the noose. I kept to myself, worked the fires, mended boots, nothing more." "And Eli?" she asked. He turned his face to the wall. "One night, a couple of them came back with a boy. Said he was fast, quiet, might be useful for squeezing into mine shafts. Said they'd keep him long enough to pull the last of the silver from the bone tunnels. Then maybe sell him south." Clara's heart pounded. "And you let it happen?" Jonas shook his head, shame thick in his throat. "I tried to speak. Got a rifle, butt across the face for my trouble. Figured if I couldn't stop it, I'd at least keep an eye on him. Maybe find a way out. But the roaches don't leave trails behind, and I wasn't about to drag a kid into the desert alone. Not without a plan." Her eyes narrowed. "So what changed?" Jonas exhaled slowly. "They set fire to the hollow church. Just for sport. That's when I knew what I was running with. The kind that don't come back from the dark." Clara remembered the fire, distant but bright against the night. Montlo had called it a lightning strike. Eli told me about the locket. Said it was all he had left of home. He never cried, but at night, he'd whisper to it like it could answer. I took a knife to my palm and swore to that boy I'd bring it back to you." "And now," she asked, "I've got 1 good arm, 2 bad ribs, and a death mark on my back." Jonas said with a crooked grin. "But I know where they sleep. I know their hideout. I know the way through the hollow canyons that the maps don't show." Clara stared hard at him. She saw the truth in his face, weathered, beaten, but stubborn as stone. A man who'd lost something, maybe long ago, and found a sliver of redemption in a child's trust. "You can walk?" she asked. "I can crawl if I have to. Then we ride at dawn." The next morning, she brought out Caleb's old saddle and fitted it to the gray mare. Jonas mounted slow, teeth gritted against the pain. She handed him a tin flask and the sharper of her 2 pistols. They didn't speak much as they rode. The land rolled out like a burial shroud, parched earth, brittle scrub, vultures overhead like black sails on a dead sea. Clara wore Caleb's coat, patched and faded, but still warm in the cold dawn air. As they neared the canyon rim, Jonas pointed with a trembling hand. "There. See that split in the rock face? That's where we start." She didn't question, just nudged the mare forward. By mid-afternoon, they reached the edge of Devil's Spine, a labyrinth of crimson stone and shadowed gullies twisted like broken ribs across the horizon. The heat pressed in. Wind howled through the crevices like voices from the grave. Jonas dismounted, staggered to his feet. They hole up in the caves. Move often, but they stash their loot in the big hollow, one with a scar across the stone like a lightning crack. "How many?" Clara asked. 7, maybe 8. One's half mad, another's worse sober than drunk. But they sleep heavy after a haul. If we move by night." She cut him off. "We're not waiting till they're comfortable." He looked at her, then nodded. "You ever shoot a man?" "I buried one." She adjusted her coat. Didn't need to shoot him to make it stick. Jonas laughed once, a dry sound. Remind me not to cross you. As the sun dipped below the canyon's edge, they descended on foot, tying the horses in a thicket and moving quiet as ghosts. Shadows deepened, swallowing the world in ink and silence. Clara's boots crunched once on loose gravel. Jonas winced, but she steadied her breath and continued. At last, they reached the overlook. Below them, the firelight from a hidden camp flickered against the rocks. A few figures moved, men hunched over stewpots, laughter like broken glass echoing up the walls. Jonas leaned close, whispered. Eli's kept in the back, near the mule pens. If he's still there. If, she asked. He's smart, brave, but he's still a boy. Clara felt her hand shake, but only for a moment. Then she nodded. Stay here. Watch the ridge. If I don't come back, find the sheriff and lie to him if you have to. Say I was never here. Just a mother who never came home. She rose, but Jonas caught her arm, his grip firm despite the wound. I didn't come all this way to watch someone else walk into fire. I'll take the right. You go left. Their eyes locked, hers sharp, unwavering, his clouded but full of something close to hope. They descended together, blades drawn, guns tucked quiet into leather. And though the canyon was full of danger and death, Clara Boone walked like a woman who'd already buried fear. Below, the Roach boys laughed around their fire, unaware the wind was shifting, unaware that justice was coming, carried by a mother and a man who'd once run with devils, but now followed something purer. The kind of justice that doesn't ask permission, the kind that carries a locket and a rifle, and won't leave without blood or a boy. The canyon air was sharp with dust and pine resin as Clara and Jonas pressed forward beneath the lip of Devil's Spine. The rock walls loomed like scorched cathedral pillars, red and gold in the moonlight, their shadows stretching into impossible shapes across the sand. Every few yards, Clara paused to listen, to let the night speak. When it didn't, she moved on, low and deliberate, rifle cradled like a newborn. From their perch above the outlaw camp, the world had looked clear. 2 tents, a half-burnt wagon, mules hitched near a spring, and a fire surrounded by boots and laughter. Now, down in the gullet of the canyon, it was chaos and waiting. Echoes bounced where they shouldn't. The fire made monsters of the men, and every step closer to Eli felt like stepping through smoke, through memory, through the last quiet thread of mercy she had. Jonas motioned with 2 fingers, pointed to the right path, the narrow channel where the mule pens rested. Clara nodded. They split. The moment she left his side, the cold returned. She crept along the left ridge, hugging the rock face, boots finding silence on years of packed dust. Below, one of the Roach boys laughed, too loud, too drunk, and threw a tin plate into the fire. Sparks jumped. Another grumbled and stomped off toward the tents, dragging a rifle behind him like it was an afterthought. Clara moved when he passed, slipping down a crevice that led toward the boy pens. She could smell the animals before she saw them, mule sweat and old hay, the sour odor of men too long in the wild. But beneath it all, faint and distant, was another scent, soap, or what passed for it, and something gentler. She held her breath, and then she heard it, a voice small, flat, barely above a whisper. Don't cry, it said. Mama, don't cry. Mama's coming. Her chest seized. She turned the corner and found the pen. A rough corral, roped off with half-rotted timber. And inside, curled beneath a pile of old canvas, was a boy, not more than 10, hair matted, cheeks sunken, eyes wide in the dark. Eli, she breathed. His head snapped up. Mama, he whispered, like he didn't dare hope. Before she could answer, a boot scraped behind her. Clara spun, rifle raised. Too late. The butt of a shotgun slammed into her jaw, and stars burst behind her eyes. She hit the ground hard, vision swimming. Eli screamed. A heavy boot crushed her wrist, pinning her gun. Well, I'll be, said a voice slick with poison. Didn't think the lady herself would come strolling into our arms. Clara blinked through the blur. A man stood above her, broad-shouldered, face half covered in soot, teeth like broken corn. Harlan Roach, the eldest. The one Caleb had warned her about when they still had nights on the porch and war stories to trade. Harlan Roach, who once slit a man's throat in church for coughing during a sermon. Thought you'd send a marshal, maybe. He grinned. But this here's a gift. Ain't she, boys? Laughter echoed behind him. Boots gathered. 3 more shapes stepped from the shadows, grimy, armed, hungry for pain. Eli backed into the corner of the pen, fists raised like they'd do any good. Harlan leaned down and plucked the locket from Clara's collar, fingers greasy. Ain't this sweet? Boy's been whimpering over this thing for days. Guess I'll hang it off my saddle now. As a keepsake. Clara spat blood. You won't live long enough to mount a saddle. Roach raised a brow. Feisty. We'll see how long that lasts once we... The shot rang out like a thunderclap. Roach's ear exploded in a mist of red and gristle. He screamed, dropped his shotgun. Another shot. One of the other outlaws fell backward, clutching his gut. Screams. Confusion. Someone shouted. Up on the ridge. Jonas. Clara rolled sideways, free of the boot, snatched her rifle and fired. The third man went down with a hole in his throat. Eli scrambled toward her. Run, she shouted, pushing him behind the pen. But there was no time. Harlan recovered, face half gone, eyes wild with hate. He grabbed Clara by the coat and slammed her into the fence. Wood cracked. Pain lit her ribs. His hand found her throat. You're dead, woman, he hissed. I'll kill the boy slow. You get to watch. His grip tightened. Then a sound, a low whine, strange and rising. A fuse. The fire pit exploded. The blast lit up the canyon like sunrise. Flames roared. Bodies scattered. Smoke choked the night. Jonas came limping through the firestorm, shotgun blazing, clothes singed but eyes burning with fury. Clara slammed her boot into Roach's knee. He howled and dropped. She scrambled, gasping, grabbed the iron stake from the mule pen, and drove it through his chest. He twitched once, then went still. Jonas reached her, half falling to one knee. You all right? He gasped. Clara didn't answer. She grabbed Eli, pulled him into her arms. The boy shook. Mama, I'm here, she whispered. I'm here now. Gunfire still echoed up the ridge. Jonas had hit too, but more were scrambling from the tents, rifles raised. The whole canyon was waking. Clara turned to Jonas. There's more coming. I see that. Any chance of holding them? He looked at the narrow cut to the east. Maybe. That ravine chokes into a tunnel. If we draw them in, pick them off at the neck. Clara nodded. You think you can make it there? I've got half a soul left. That should be enough. She kissed Eli's head. You run. Run east. See that narrow pass? There's a hollow tree with a mark on it. Go there. Stay quiet. He opened his mouth to protest, but she cupped his face. No more bravery. Just run. He ran. They turned together, Clara and Jonas, moving into the gorge as shouts rang out and torches lit behind them. They found the choke point, narrow, defensible, walls high. Jonas reloaded. Clara took the left wall. They'll be on us in minutes, he said. Then we make those minutes count. The first outlaw came charging through with a yell. Clara dropped him clean. Jonas got the second. They ducked, reloaded, fired again. Bodies piled in the pass. Then quiet. Then nothing. She leaned her head back, breath ragged. How many? Jonas shook his head. Not enough to matter, but maybe enough to buy the boy a chance. She looked at him. Blood leaked from a wound near his side. You staying? She asked. He nodded, slow. You could run. I did that already, he said. Didn't like who I was when I stopped. Then he smiled, faint and ragged. Besides, this ain't a bad place to end. Clara looked at him, at the fire behind his eyes, and knew she'd misjudged him from the start. He wasn't just some drifter. He was the last of a dying breed, a man who'd walked with devils and come back burning for justice. The rocks shook with approaching boots. They readied their weapons in silence, and as the canyon narrowed and darkness fell in full, Clara Boone stood beside the man who brought back her son's locket, and together they waited for the final reckoning. The morning after the fire, the canyon was quiet. Smoke clung to the rocks like ghosts too tired to leave. Ash fell soft as snow. Clara walked through the wreckage with Eli's hand in hers, her boots crunching on charred wood and the remnants of gunpowder. The boy didn't speak. He hadn't since they'd found her again, bleeding and half-conscious, with Jonas lying beside her in the dust. They'd both survived, somehow. Jonas worse for wear, pale, blood-soaked, ribs cracked, but breathing. She dragged him through the pass, one step at a time, with Eli keeping lookout like a soldier born. The outlaws hadn't followed. Maybe they thought the fire had taken them. Maybe fear had. Either way, the fight was over. At least for now. They reached the spring where the mules had been. One was still alive, wild-eyed and trembling, tied beneath the scorched tree. Clara checked its legs, unfastened the rope, and whispered soft words until it stilled. Eli handed her what was left of the saddlebag, Jonas's coat, a flask, the boy's locket still warm from where it had pressed against Jonas's chest. "Is he gonna die?" Eli finally asked. Clara paused. "Not today." That seemed enough for him. The boy sat on a rock and watched the wind move the ashes. Clara found Jonas near the ridge, propped against a stone like it was the only thing holding him up. He'd wrapped his side with an old shirt. His eyes fluttered open as she approached. "You're too loud," he muttered. "Could hear your boots from a mile." She knelt beside him. "You should have let me take the left wall. You're the better shot. I just make noise and bleed dramatic." Clara smiled, but it didn't last. "You should rest." He nodded, closed his eyes again, then opened them. The boy, alive, quiet, stronger than he looks. "That he is," Jonas whispered. "Takes after his mother." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes after gunfire. Then Jonas stirred, looked at her like it hurt to move. "You should leave this place." "Already planned on it." "Where to?" Clara looked east. "Maybe Virginia, or some corner no one remembers." Jonas grunted. "Good. Let the past die out here." She studied him. "What about you?" He didn't answer, just reached into his coat and pulled out a small object, flat metal, blood-stained. The bullet. He placed it in her palm. "That one had my name on it. Missed by half an inch." Clara turned it over. "Cold. Heavy. Real. You keep it," Jonas said. "Proof that sometimes death don't get what it wants." She nodded, tucked the bullet into her coat pocket beside the locket. They rode out by noon. One mule between them, the boy riding with Clara, Jonas holding tight behind, stubborn as ever. The canyon faded behind them like a bad dream unraveling. No one followed. The wind carried only the sounds of hoofbeats and breath. By the time they reached the edge of the pine line, a storm was brewing. Lightning in the distance, thunder like a slow drum. They stopped beneath an old stone arch, remnants of some forgotten Spanish trail. Jonas looked out over the open land and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, "I used to think there was no such thing as redemption." Clara looked up at him. "But you and that boy," he shook his head, "you changed the ending." He reached into his coat once more, pulled out a faded slip of paper, a wanted poster, his name across the top. Jonas Cade, dead or alive. "Time was, I wore this like a second skin," he said, "but I'm thinking maybe it's time someone else carried the story." He handed it to Eli. The boy took it with both hands. "Read the words slowly." "Is this who you were?" he asked. Jonas looked down at him. "No, that's who I used to be. Today, I'm someone who gave your locket back." Eli nodded like he understood something larger than himself. He folded the paper and tucked it into his own coat. They rode on. Months later, stories would drift through border towns of a woman who'd hunted through the Devil's Spine and come out with a boy in her arms, of a stranger who faced down a gang with a bullet in his side and smoke in his eyes. Some said the woman was a ghost. Others claimed the man had once been a killer, but found peace beside the fire. They were never seen again in those parts. But sometimes, when the wind turned west and the pines whispered low, someone would find a single bullet nailed to a tree, clean, unspent, polished like silver, and beside it, carved into the bark, a name, Eli Boone, the boy who returned with a legend in his saddle.